Okay, let me step over here so I can use this cool laser. Okay, so the boat conversation, having eyes, do not see. At this point, the disciples, they don't see. They don't know who Jesus is. They don't get it. And then he has this two-phase healing. And then, right here, you have Peter's realization, and then Peter's satanic screw-up. Now, I sort of said satanic kind of as a joke because there's a little bit of disagreement as to why he calls him Satan. It could just mean adversary or something. But anyway, so he has this great realization and then this big screw-up. So here, the disciples, they see and understand that Jesus is the Messiah, but they don't really understand what that means. So here, they don't see, and here, they see, but they don't understand. Does that ring a bell with this little healing? When he heals him the first time, and the guy can see, but he doesn't know what he's seeing. He heals him the second time, and then he understands what he's seeing. It would be almost like Jesus healed his eyes and then healed his brain, because obviously, if you can't see, if you're blind, your brain never develops how to process that information. So this healing of Jesus, Mark uses that story to show something about the disciples, to show something about their progression of understanding. All right? Is that making sense? Tracking with me? Good. Okay, let's look at the big picture of Mark, the overview. The first half of the book is about Jesus' identity, who he is. The second half is about his mission, what he's going to do. And the turning point in the whole book is that statement, you are the Christ. If you study Mark, which I actually chose studying Mark originally because it's the shortest gospel. It seemed the least daunting of all of them. But if you study the book, you'll find that a lot of things change after that point. There's less miracles. The way Jesus interacts with people is different. There's just a lot of changes. That's the turning point. Because now it's not about him showing who he is. The first half he shows that he has authority over nature, authority over demons, authority over the scriptures, over the Sabbath. He's showing all these things. The second half of the book, it's leading up to his death. Now, that second half is, what does it say there? Oh, now that they know who he is, he's going to educate them about his mission. Now, the mission has two parts. One, he explains it. This is what I'm going to do. And then he does it. So the section of the explaining his mission is chapters 8, 9, and 10. That's when he educates the disciples about what his mission is. And then, starting in chapter 11, he goes to Jerusalem, and that's the final countdown towards his death. Starts counting down. 2 days before Passover, 1 day before Passover, the night before, the morning of, leading up to his death. So this is the section that we're going to look at. His educating the disciples. Now they know who he is. Finally, Peter says, you're the Christ. Now he can start to educate them on his mission. So here it is. The disciples' education. It starts and ends with a blind healing. It starts out with this blind healing that we just talked about that takes 2 phases. And it ends with a 1-phase healing of Bartimaeus. And he just heals him. Boom. So you can see how those blind healings function as like bookends, right? For this section of Scripture. And you can also see how healing a blind person is a good way to, a good representation of education, right? Your eyes are opened. Jesus even uses that. He says to him, do you have eyes but not see? He uses see sort of metaphorically to mean understand. Now, that doesn't mean that these stories didn't happen. Jesus literally, physically healed blind people, but Mark uses those in his book to get you to notice things. By the order that Mark puts the stories, he wants you to notice certain things. So those 2 stories bookend the healing, and in the middle, is Jesus saying, I'm going to be killed. 3 times. He says, I'll be killed, and then Peter says, no, and then he says, I'll be killed, and then the disciples say something else, and he says, I'll be killed. And each time, Jesus has to explain something to them. He says it, the disciples say something stupid, then he explains something to them, and then there's a story of interaction with someone else, either a crowd or a different person, and you see the disciples learning from how Jesus talks to them. So that's the structure of this section. 2 blind healings and then 3 proclamations of his death. Okay. So, 1, 2, 3. There you have it. So the first one. Let's talk about this first section. When Jesus says, I'm going to be killed, Peter says, no, you're not. And then Jesus has to teach him this. You're not setting your mind on God's interest, but on man's. That's the teaching. Well, we actually already talked about that, right? Peter wanted to be rescued from Rome, not from his sins. That's what Peter's thinking was. And Jesus has to say, your mind needs to be on God's things. It needs to be on heavenly things, not on earthly things. So, he says, put your mind on God's things. And then he has this whole physical versus spiritual. He has a whole little teaching about this. First he says, the man who tries to save his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake in the Gospels will save it. That's what you call a paradox, which is a big word for something that doesn't make any sense. But it does, though. It doesn't, but it does. How can this be? If you save your life, you lose it, but if you lose it, you save it. What do you mean, Jesus? Well, if you lose your life for me, for my sake, then you save it. Because what you're losing is your earthly life. Your physical, tangible, material life. Material meaning matter and energy. But what you're gaining is something spiritual. So that's how that makes sense. Then he says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? Peter, which is more valuable? Everything in this whole universe, every object, or your soul, which is not an object, which is immaterial and spiritual? What will a man give in exchange for his soul? So Jesus is teaching the disciples a new value system. The physical world is not what's valuable. It's the spiritual. So, he says, I'll be killed, and then he has to teach them this concept. All right. Whoops, let's go back to that. So, back to this. You can't see that red very well. But what I have here is, he says, I'll be killed, and then they say, we want an earthly king. I mean, that's basically what they're saying when he rebukes him. And he has to teach them that. Then we have another, I'll be killed. And they say something else stupid. Jesus says, talking about the Son of Man, which is himself, they'll kill him. Then it says, but the disciples did not understand this statement, and they were afraid to ask him. Last time Peter got called Satan, so let's just not say anything here. What do they talk about, though?